Hello, everyone. Thanks for being here. This is a Living City conversation at Focolare Media. My name is Jon M. Sweeney. I'm the editor of the magazine, Living City. I hope that you are a subscriber. I hope you enjoy reading our content and engaging with us around important topics such as this one. We are here to talk about the 60th anniversary of Nostra Aetate, the document of the Second Vatican Council, and we're going to get into that in just a minute. We have three guests with us, and I want you to meet them one by one individually, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves in a second. I'm going to do that because I want you to hear their voice. I want them to share who they are religiously, geographically, what they do, what their work is in the world before we all start talking. But they are Jordan Denari Duffner and Rabbi Or Rose and Hakan Yesilova, but they will introduce themselves in a minute. Before we do that, I wanted to say just a couple of pieces of groundskeeping. One is, I don't want to assume that everyone who's here to talk about Nostra Aetate agrees about what Nostra Aetate accomplished or didn't accomplish in the Roman Catholic Church or in interfaith or interreligious relationships between the Catholic Church and the other religious traditions of the world. I don't want to assume that we all think that the work is a finished work or a work that's incomplete or a work that wasn't called for or any of those sorts of things. There's a difference of opinions about those sorts of things. I don't think we're going to get into a lot of those differences of opinions in our conversation between the four of us, but there will be an opportunity for you to ask questions. And in the second half of our time together, or maybe in the last 20 minutes, more accurately, depending on how long we talk, you can write in the Q&A, and I will see your questions and I will pose them to one of the speakers if you've addressed it to them or to everyone to see what a response might be to what it is that is on your mind or on your heart. So I will start very quickly by saying who I am religiously, geographically, and why I'm here. I already mentioned why I'm here. Religiously, I am a Roman Catholic, but I'm someone who has been interested and involved in conversations around Nostra Aetate, particularly in conversations with the Jewish community for about 20 years. Or 25 years. Part of that is because of work I have done in book publishing, where I used to work for a Jewish book publisher, a Christian guy who worked for a Jewish book publisher. And then after that, I actually ended up marrying a rabbi, which is a little unusual for a devout Catholic guy, but that's the way life is. And it's been very rich. And it just put me into the middle of those conversations even more in ways that I have welcomed and enjoyed. In fact, this gives me a chance to plug the magazine. Hopefully you've gotten the new issue, which is the November-December issue, just arrived in my mailbox a few days ago. Our theme is faith in Mexico and beyond. And if you look on page 18, you'll see that I wrote the little article about Jews and Judaism in Mexico. To be perfectly honest with you, I wrote it because I couldn't find someone else to do it. And so I wrote it myself, and I make reference to a couple of sources in there of people who know a whole lot more than I do. But you'll see in my little byline at the bottom of that piece that I'm giving a talk about Nostra Aetate at a Catholic university in the spring. And just the title of my talk will tell you a little bit about what I think about the document and what remains perhaps still to be done in the Catholic Church with relationship to Nostra Aetate. So that's who I am. Oh, I didn't say geographically. I am coming to you from Middlebury, Vermont, and I actually decided to sit on the porch, even though it's a little bit cold, but I figured, what the heck, there won't be many more days when I can do that. So why don't I turn to you, Jordan, and then we'll go to Or, and then we'll go to Hakan.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's wonderful to be with you. Again, I'm Jordan Denari Duffner, and I'm speaking to you today from outside Washington, D.C. in Hyattsville, Maryland, where I live with my husband and two little ones. I am a Catholic Christian, and most of my work focuses on Muslim-Catholic dialogue. I am a student and scholar of Islam and also the Catholic Church's sort of history of engaging other religious traditions. I've spent a lot of my career at Georgetown University here in the DC area, but currently I'm a visiting scholar at the University of Mary Washington in Fredericksburg, Virginia, and I'm teaching a course there that I put together called Jesus and Muhammad, the Bible and Quran, which has been sort of a really fun exercise and dialogue with my students, some of whom themselves are coming from interfaith families. So that's a little bit about me and what I've been up to in this phase of my life. Thanks, John.
Good afternoon. My name is Or Rose, and I live in Newton, Massachusetts, which is just outside of Boston proper, and I teach at Hebrew College. I direct the Miller Center for Interreligious Learning and Leadership. In addition to that responsibility and privilege, I also teach courses in the Jewish mystical tradition. And among other connections to Jon, he was my editor most recently of a book for teens and young adults on the great theologian and social activist Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel of blessed memory. Heschel, as some of you know, was very involved with the Second Vatican Council and serves, among others, as a model for me of the intersection of spirituality and social justice. So I'm honored to be with you and looking forward to our conversation.
Right. My name is Hakan Yesilova. I'm based in North Jersey, here in Clifton. I work for a publishing house. My career looks pretty much similar to Jon's in many ways. I've been in the publishing world for almost 3 decades. I know I look young, but otherwise I've been in translation and editing work for quite some time, mostly dealing with the Fountain magazine, like Your Living City, a Muslim counterpart, perhaps I would say, inspired by the ideas and the teachings of Fethullah Gulen, the late scholar who passed last year in Pennsylvania, a leading Turkish scholar. Maybe you're familiar with his face. We published a special edition about his who was a pioneer in interfaith dialogue back in Turkey, and then carried that onwards wherever he went and his teachings went. So what we're doing in this publishing house is basically to publish books and magazines in a way to make this idea of dialogue and peaceful engagement more established, in addition to teaching Islam more in line with its original sources. So that's what I do, and look forward to learning from Jordan and Rabbi Or and Jon, of course.
Thanks very much, Hakan. Thank you, Or. Thank you, Jordan. Thank you all for being here with us. So I want to get us started, and I want to do that by pointing to the article that Jordan wrote that we published online about 8 or 9 days ago, and it was called Living the Legacy of Nostra Aetate. We asked Jordan to write that on the occasion of the 60th anniversary, and we figured that that would be the grounding that we would use in this conversation too. Jordan not only gives sort of an intellectual, historical overview in a really helpful way, but also gets practical, frankly, in ways that I didn't realize she was going to do so much until she sent in the article, and we were so delighted. She lays out, what we can do or what we ought to do, offering some opinions in that regard, some really helpful stuff. And just to give a couple of quotes from what Jordan has to say there, she says that what the church says in Nostra Aetate is that Catholics can find value in other religions. There are elements of them which are true and holy, and that's a quote from the document, teachings and rituals of other faith traditions that are the locus of God's activity. And then one more quote, she says, a task for Catholics today, 60 years after Vatican II, is to be on the lookout for all that is true and holy in other religions, to notice where God is at work in the spiritual lives and ethical traditions of our friends of other faiths. So at this point, Jordan, I want to turn it over to you. I mean, I've just said a couple of things about what you were doing in what you wrote for us, but could you lay out for us just briefly in, 5-10 minutes, what is the living legacy of Nostra Aetate, and where do you think it points us and what we need to do?
Oh, thank you so much, John. I want to start my remarks by just saying that I'm very excited, that we are now at the 60th anniversary, and we have an excuse to celebrate this really important document, because I really think that if Nostra Aetate didn't exist, I don't know if I would have continued to make a home in the Catholic Church that I grew up in. The fact that the church in Nostra Aetate and in some of the other conciliar documents and those that come in its wake, the fact that the church is able to stay rooted in its own teachings and traditions while still finding value in, as I said, sort of the traditions of our friends of other faiths, is just very sort of helpful to me and kind of affirming of my own experience. When I was growing up, my mom kind of tells the story back to me. We were driving to grade school. I think I was in 4th grade, and I said to her mom, I was like, well, what happens to people who don't believe in Jesus? I'm going to my Catholic school, probably going to, Wednesday morning mass or something like that. And obviously understand the importance of our tradition and our teachings, but realizing that not everybody's Christian, but what happens to them? These are good people too. And Nostra Aetate, I think, gives us the beginning of a roadmap for how to do that kind of cross-religious engagement, and also to help us, as I said, be on the lookout for all that is good and true and holy in other faith traditions. What's interesting about Nostra Aetate and sort of this line that you picked up, John, is that it doesn't explicitly go all the way to say that there are elements of other religious traditions that, are the locus of God's activity. That's sort of my interpretation after the fact. But what's interesting is in the wake of Nostra Aetate, John Paul II really says, it's not only God working in the hearts and minds of individuals, of Jews and Muslims and others, but really we can see sort of the activity of the Spirit in cultures, in societies, and even in elements of religious traditions. Now, the church doesn't, the Catholic Church isn't doesn't ascribe to pluralism, so to speak, in the sense of saying all paths are equal or all religious traditions are doing the same thing. But I think what the council and later, JP2 and others have sort of pointed out is we can, if we use the right, set of glasses, see that God is working beyond the confines of the church. And at least for me in my own work in Catholic Muslim dialogue and study, I've been trying to look for some of those places. Some of my teachers talk about how Nostra Aetate only really gives us kind of the baseline level, but there is more that can be said. So in terms of Catholic Muslim engagement, the church affirms all of these different elements of Muslim belief and practice, belief in the one God, reverence for Jesus and Mary, prayer, fasting, and almsgiving. But it doesn't say anything about the more distinctive aspects of Muslims' religious tradition. It doesn't talk about the Quran. It doesn't talk about the Prophet Muhammad, in part because they knew that would be a little bit tricky. These are things that really make us different from each other. And so I, in my own work, have sort of been reflecting on this question of the Prophet Muhammad and his significance for Muslims. And so the theology part is and kind of examining our religious traditions is something that for me has been an important part of the legacy of Nostra Aetate. Now, there's lots of other things too, as I mentioned in the article, this, to go back to the point that Rabbi talked about, making sure we're integrating spirituality and social justice. If we're only talking about our theology and only talking about our sort of shared values, but not looking at how they might apply to things, then I think we've missed the mark. And I think that's an important legacy of Nostra Aetate as well.
Thanks, Jordan. I want to turn to you next, Or. And I said at the outset before we got started and before everyone else joined us that I wasn't going to ask any surprise questions, but I'm going to ask you just a slight surprise question, but I think you're prepared for it. Would you, in your remarks, would you mind giving us a little bit of the background, the Jewish context of the creation of Nostra Aetate, because it is a very interesting piece of the story. Pope John the 23rd and relationships that he had with Jewish leaders and conversations that he had with Jewish leaders, which helped to lead towards the church, helped to nudge the church towards this document that made such a big splash 60 years ago.
Again, thanks for including me in the conversation. And Jordan, thank you for setting the table for us so beautifully with your article and with your introductory remarks. I think part of what has to be said in this context is that we celebrate Nostra Aetate at 60 in a world that remains beset by bigotry, by violence, by extreme polarization, and by having the audacity, one might say, to celebrate this landmark achievement, we are reinvesting in hope. And to me, that's an important part of why we gather. And of course, Nostra Aetate came out of a period in human history that involved unspeakable crimes against humanity, the Second World War and the Holocaust, and the kind of process of tshuva, as we would refer to it in Hebrew, a turning and a returning to core values and principles. The Catholic Church's decision to engage in a process, again, to use Hebrew language, of cheshbon nefesh, a soul accounting, is something that was born out of the ashes of demonic hatred, and at the same time points the way to the possibility of repentance and restoration. And of course, it also has to be added in this context that modern anti-Semitism, which led to the catastrophe that was the Shoah, the Holocaust, was preceded by centuries of Christian animus towards Jews and Judaism, and the mistreatment of Jews and Judaism. And yet, in the formulation, John, as you were alluding to, of this process, which is as important as the product, there were a whole series of personal and professional relationships that led to this historical gathering and the publication of In Our Time, Nostra Aetate, which I regard, like Jordan said before, as a marker along the way. It remains unfinished, as it should. And we know that to convene thousands of Catholics and then to invite advisors from other traditions to be a part of this process necessarily left many people unsatisfied. And yet, of course, that's the human journey. And we are here to continue that work. And I want to just zero in for a moment on the abiding principle of relational change. Because without going into the details, John, about which clerics and which scholars and which other players were involved, this history-making event could not have taken place without personal and professional relationships. And that is the essence of the work. We are not expecting or hoping for utter and final agreement or resolution, but human dignity, human consideration, epistemological, theological, ethical reflection on what we know and what we don't know. I think what we don't know is as important or more important than anything that could ever be stated in a single document or in thousands of pages of religious rhetoric. So I'll pause there, and I just want to reaffirm the foundational methodology for this work, which is people like us, whether lay folk or professionals, whether religious leaders or not, coming together to speak, but also to listen with as much sensitivity as possible.
I appreciate that very much. Thank you. Or I need that reminder myself all the time. I don't know about you, but my work here at Focolare Media and in other ways, my work is all about bridge building and peace and unity. But I wake up in the morning and have to remind myself to have hope very, very often. So I appreciate that. Let me pause for a second before I turn to Hakan and say that, as Or just alluded to, Nostra Aetate, maybe I should have said this at the top. It means in our time, and that's because it was written in Latin. Because of course, all good church documents are written in Latin, and those are the first words of the document, and that's how these documents often get their name. In our time, when day by day mankind is being drawn closer together, etc., etc., is how Nostra Aetate begins, and so that is why it is called Nostra Aetate. It is a what's called a declaration. It was not an encyclical of the Pope. It was a declaration of the Council. Declaration on the relation of the Church to non-Christian religions is the way it was phrased in that time. In October 28th, 1965. We might come back to that subject later, perhaps, the idea of referring to the other religions of the world as non-Christian religions. But anyway, let's turn to Hakan at this point. If you could give us some opening remarks, Hakan, of sort of how you approach this subject of the hope that is related to the Roman Catholic Church opening its understanding to non-Christian religions, but how does that relate to your work and the spiritual traditions from which you come?
Well, I mean, you mentioned the English translation of the word Nostra Aetate, in our time. There's a concept in our tradition, to be Ibnul Waqt, to be the child of your time, is a significant concept with regards to your spiritual journey. So I believe the council's titling this declaration with that is very significant to me, because it really reads like a beautiful response in welcoming the new conditions of the time. I mean, just thinking of those cardinals and clergy, considering people were approaching one another, and I'm projecting them to 2025, where we're having this meeting through Zoom and every other instruments. I don't know how they would really think about themselves. That's a beautiful vision. Realizing the fact that the time is, in a way, coming shorter and closer. Space is coming closer and shorter. We are we have to be in that awareness that in this time we're much more closer than we ever have been in our history. But the flip side of it is also, we need to consider, as we're closer through technology, there's also another path of looking at things, as we're not as conventional neighbors anymore. I mean, we're seeing our kids not as concerned as with our neighbors as we used to be. People are living in their own rooms. They're spending time in their own, echo chambers, in their own social media chambers. There is something we also need to I think, tackle and perhaps reinterpret of being in that time of coming together closer, but somehow still distant and perhaps foreign and stranger. But what I would say regarding the declaration is something that I find authentically Islamic, is I would definitely believe Jordan would agree with that. We see in the example of the Prophet of recognizing the other, recognizing different traditions when he welcomed the Christians from Najran, when he allowed them to worship in his own mosque, when he encountered with the Jewish communities in the city of Medina, when he drafted the perhaps arguably one of the first constitutions or social contracts in the city of Medina, when he signed the Medina contract, most of it the pagans and the Jewish tribes, recognizing each one of them with their own faith tradition. So for that matter, when we really dig into the life of the prophet and also read the spirit that is found in the Holy Quran, where we're invited to the common word between us, when there's this invitation to the people of the book, mostly Christians and Jewish traditions are understood in that call, we see a similar concern, a similar perhaps motivation to bring the peoples of the world under the same roof, perhaps. I think in a time when the human beings are capable, sadly, of destroying the entire planet, I think this call makes much more sense than ever. I think our places of worship could be places of refuge, could be places of friendship, and I think the Vatican Council's Nostra Aetate declaration is one of the strongest pillars in our time that really paved the way to that understanding.
Thank you very much. Jordan, I want to come back to you. I know that in your article, you talk about the importance of, for all of us, to commit ourselves to dialogue. And that's a word I have encountered with, people in the pews, that the word dialogue is sometimes sort of an off-putting word for them. It feels to them like a professional word, like that's what certain people do in boardrooms or something, but it's not what ordinary people do. So can you explain what does that mean? Explain that to someone who might object that, dialogue is not something that they do at the grocery store.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think I've encountered this sort of misperception as well. I think people think of dialogue is something that's only done by scholars or only done by clergy. And I always, especially when I talk to university students and high schoolers, I would say, no, you're doing dialogue too. You just might not be calling it that. Because, for the church, any sort of positive relationships between Catholics or Christians and people of other faiths is an expression of dialogue. It's mutual enrichment, collaboration that is open-hearted, that is seeking the good, and that, Pope Francis talked a lot about dialogue as sharing our joys and sorrows with the other. And I just love that because it's about truly listening and being open, as Rabbi Or was talking about, but also sharing from ourselves, sharing from our faith tradition. The church also is trying to hold together what it calls dialogue and proclamation. Proclamation, this idea of sharing, the Christian tradition with others. And it's not always clear how those are supposed to fit together as core parts of the church's mission. But for me, I had sort of a breakthrough a few months ago when I was invited to a local mosque here in the DC area to do a dialogue with the rabbi there. And, in my line of work, what I often find myself doing actually is explaining Islam to my fellow Catholics. I don't actually get to kind of talk about my own tradition a whole lot to Muslim audiences. And it was really kind of a profound experience to just share of my own tradition and my own kind of self-understanding of God, not in any way to try to convince anyone, but to just make myself known to them as they're making themselves known to me. And just that sharing, I think, is really important. The church also has kind of outlined what it calls the 4 types of dialogue. So I'll just kind of share what those briefly are, because they really are all encompassing. The first is the dialogue of theological exchange. So, scholars, clergy talking about beliefs and ideas and things like that. I'm involved in these sorts of dialogues. I'm sure some of you are as well. For example, I'm a part of the Catholic Muslim dialogue that's run by the U.S. Bishops' Conference. And so that's a setting where academics and others are coming together to talk about sometimes fairly high-level ideas. There's some other sort of, academic settings in which we're doing this kind of dialogue as well. At the same time, though, I think theological dialogue is actually being done by lay people more than we all realize and they realize. I think back on a time when I was an undergraduate student, when I would get together with a Protestant friend and a Muslim friend in our dorm room with our holy texts, and we would just share stories and read and talk about all of that. And that too is theological dialogue. There's also the dialogue of spiritual experience, which I think is one of my maybe favorite types of dialogue, because it's when we maybe go to the house of worship of someone else, or we watch them in performing their liturgy or their rituals, or maybe we participate in it ourselves. I have in my mind photos of Vatican officials when they went to, when Pope Francis went to visit Grand Ayatollah Sistani in Iraq, and Pope Francis didn't go, but Vatican officials went to the shrine of Ali in Najaf, the prophet's cousin, and you just see the priest sort of looking up at this beautiful glittering house of worship, and I thought, oh, that's the dialogue of spiritual experience, right? He's having this exposure to a tradition and just a space that is new and different and enriching. Then there's also the dialogue of social action, working together to solve the world's, problems. And so we can think of everything from, neighborhood activities to clean up your local park, to political actions, and everything in between. And I think one of the things that I have been most inspired by in this difficult time that Rabbi Or pointed to earlier is the solidarity between Christians, Jews, and Muslims to push for peace and justice in the Holy Land. I think oftentimes the situation in Palestine and Israel is framed as something that divides us, and I think we've seen evidence of that in certain respects. It has caused tension between different religious groups, but I actually do think there's also a lot of shared values and shared activism that come out of our faith traditions on this. And so even though that's not always what makes the headlines, it's something that I certainly am inspired by. And then I'll just say the last form of dialogue for the church is the dialogue of life. And that's basically when people of different faith traditions are living side by side, living their ordinary, normal lives. And, I've had plenty of experiences with friends of other faith traditions where we've, been hanging out or on a phone call or, having our kids, play together for a play date. And it's only after the fact that I realized, oh, that was a form of interreligious dialogue. But I think that's how it's supposed to be, because this isn't meant to be something contrived or forced, but really just an expression of our desire to live, in fraternity, as Francis would say, with our friends of other faith traditions.
Thanks, Jordan. Now, Rabbi Rose, I want to turn to you. Jordan said something there that I jotted down, which was she made reference to the proclamation aspect of Christianity. And I jotted it down because I was thinking of the difference then between Christianity and Judaism. And this is actually kind of a linchpin that sometimes we've gotten into trouble with, is that Christianity is a missionary tradition. Christians are commanded to share their faith, and that then relates to all different aspects of proclamation, which then can be oppressive if it's not done correctly or well. And it has very often not been done correctly or well. So anyway, my question, I guess, to you is, coming from the other side, from a tradition that doesn't have missionaries, but yet you are and your institution at Hebrew College is a great example of an aspect of Judaism that is very interested in openness and unity with Christians and people of other religious traditions. But you don't go about it by faith sharing necessarily. You do it in other ways. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that, how you go, how you respond to this desire for unity without the missionary impulse.
Thank you. That's a rich question. I appreciate you creating the stitching between Jordan's reflections and mine. I would say that fundamentally, as I was listening to Jordan and now responding to you, I'm thinking of an expression that my mother has shared with me from her father, who himself was an emigre from Nazi occupied Europe. He and my grandmother fled Germany and Austria in 1938 and lived the rest of their lives in New York City. And he repeatedly said to my mother and to others, give a face to your faith. Give a face to your faith. And to me, that's a powerful statement in his own idiosyncratic terms on bearing witness, what we would describe in Hebrew from the Bible as edut. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Right? That famous faith statement, if you will. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one, in the book of Deuteronomy. And to me, that's an important part of meeting and engaging people from different walks of life and beginning to understand, never fully understanding, but beginning to understand how it is that they orient themselves in the world. And when individuals, whether Christian or Muslim or otherwise, share that with me, and I have the opportunity to reciprocate, I found it to be beautiful and deeply humanizing. And so part of the work that we do through the Miller Center at Hebrew College is, in fact, faith sharing. The question is how and to what ends? If I were to be critical of Nostra Aetate 60 years later, I would say that one of the elements that is not spoken of is the history of mission, specifically mission to the Jews. And that remains something that needs to be discussed. What is the difference between articulating passionately one's theological and existential commitments and forcing that upon others? And the church has struggled with that for centuries. I think it's also important to say that Jews never had the political and military power of Christianity or of Islam. And so I don't know how we would have fared over the centuries if we had that power at our disposal. The possibility of missionizing was one that was mostly speculative. And so now that we have greater power, that we have returned to history, so to speak, we have a responsibility to reckon with it and to recognize when and how we fail, like all other human beings. So to me, the various forms of dialogue that Jordan outlined are all significant. And I personally don't shy away from theological engagement. Some people feel like that can become too testy too quickly, or that it can devolve into disputation too soon. But I think much of that dialogue, when framed thoughtfully, can actually help us to understand each other, whether we are scholars or clergy or lay people. The other thing I'll just add is that I like that fourfold framing because it articulates something that I've seen repeatedly, which is different people will be attracted to, passionate about different forms of dialogical engagement. And, to harken back to something you said before, sometimes the term dialogue itself can feel like it is for somebody else with a different skill set. And so, how can we encourage people across our communities to engage meaningfully and to do so based on their passions and the needs in their communities? Here I'm thinking specifically about another great North American interreligious pioneer, that being the Reverend Howard Thurman, who, of course, was a mentor to, among others, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And Thurman repeatedly asked of his students and parishioners to listen for the sound of the genuine within yourself and within others. And part of listening for the sound of the genuine within yourself, he said repeatedly, was understanding what it is that God calls you to do. And so Thurman was not king, for example. And some people were disappointed by that. Thurman was much more of a pastor and an educator and a liturgical artist, you might say. And so, what is ours to do in this realm, I think, is an interesting and urgent question for each of us, because we're all needed. If we're going to engage holistically in the great project of tikkun, as we describe it in Hebrew, of mending and healing the world, then we need as many hands on deck as possible. And they don't all or mostly need to be professionally trained theologians like some of us.
Thanks very much. Hakan, I'm going to turn it to you, but before I do, let me just say to everyone that we have about 15 minutes left. I'm Jon Sweeney. This is a Living City Conversation talking about the 60th anniversary of the Vatican II document, Nostra Aetate. And by the way, if you are here joining us, it means you have an internet connection, which means that you can do an internet search, which means you can easily look up Nostra Aetate and read it for yourself. If you print it out, I think it's about 2 pages. So really, none of us has an excuse. We should all read it and know what it is that we're talking about. Hakan, let me turn towards you. There's been so much here. I don't want to direct too much in terms of what you say to us in the next few minutes. Jordan and Or have offered us a lot of rich insights. I might just suggest that question that Or brought up at the end, what is ours to do? I'd love to have your perspective on it.
Well, I mean, I loved how his, I believe, grandparent said when she said, give a face to your faith. I think that's a lovely expression of how we choose to interact with other fellow believers of other traditions. Temsil rather than tebli. Temsil meaning living up to your faith as opposed to preaching. Well, I mean, preaching is not something bad. I mean, and of course, I sympathize with everyone. When you believe in a truth, when you think it is a truth that is burning in your soul, you want to share it with others. So that's a very natural human instinct. And I believe we should respect when somebody wants to come up and teach something to you. And I would be very happy to sit down and talk. But in the philosophy and action of Fethullah Gulen, our teacher, he always said, don't impose things on people. Just live up to your faith. Be a good participant of your community. Be a useful member of your community. and they will already learn about you, your family, your culture. You know what? This morning, one of my cousins back in Turkey, he's now like a reborn Muslim. Has had some tough times in his life, and I'm seeing him now choosing like a mystical path and exploring Islam more. And he asked me the same question that Jordan was talking about a few minutes ago, about there are like 22% of the world are Muslims. What will happen to the rest of the world? You know, are they all doomed to hell? You know, of course, I try to explain that's not how we approach things, and that's not how we make a determination of the faith of people. And surely we believe in the mercy, infinite mercy of God. He said, "I have prescribed for me mercy. My compassion has transcended my wrath." It's another Hadith Qudsi, a divine word of God. So we believe in that infinite mercy, which embraces all. I think as Muslims and believers of other faith traditions, we basically need to really not focus on formalities sometimes, but really try to understand the deep core message Allah or God has been sending to us from Adam to Muhammad, as we believe he was the last. At the core message of all, it was always the same divine message that God sent to us, speaking to all and every human being. I believe in our times, Nostra Aetate, I think we have very important opportunities to come together and learn from one another. One thing, it may sometimes be challenging. A few years ago, I was invited with my family to a Jewish family home to celebrate Thanksgiving. And at the table, there were three kinds of turkeys. One was kosher, the other one was for halal, from a halal, grocery store, and the other one was, I think, from Walmart, a regular one, for those who do not practice anything. So three types of turkey. So that's tough to prepare, but I really loved the way she approached this thing, tried to bring us together, and Tavi, that's one big memory, how to celebrate Thanksgiving as a non-denominational family of being Americans here in the U.S. Maybe also, finally, in a world of social media where so much misinformation is everywhere, I think we really need to work hard a bit where the truth is more hidden. With all this technology, sometimes truth is not as clear as it used to be, which means we need to perhaps devote more time and effort to come together to approach one another. My wife is in this group of friends where they meet to a temple or a church every Sunday morning as Muslims, knocking on the door. Just look, here we are. We want to meet. We want to eat together. We have a cultural center. If you don't want to come, we will come with our food. Just let us know one another. That's what they do every Sunday. After the recent horrible events in the Middle East, I went to a funeral of a Jewish friend. I was the only Muslim who went there. But I said, this is time to be there with my Jewish friends, despite everything that is going on in Gaza and other places. I think when it is more difficult, I think we need to have the courage, to pass over to the next door and knock on the door and say, look, here I am. Whatever happens, we're still friends, we're neighbors. That sometimes requires courage, but I think as fellow members of interfaith engagement, we need to be courageous enough to do that.
Thank you, Hakan. In the minutes we have left, I'm going to let Katya have the last question for the three of you. Maybe you could each give me a 3-minute answer. It's such a good question. So Katya has written this. Where do you see interreligious dialogue going? What are the next major challenges? Where are we going at a time when dialogue in general seems to be narrowing? So who wants to jump in first?
I'm happy to go first. Yeah, I think to Katya's point, there's reasons to not to worry, but to wonder where things are going. At the same time, I do think the time is still ripe to deepen our engagement with one another. A couple of things I'll say, and this is sort of drawing from the piece that I did for Living City magazine. I think one of the things that's really important to do right now is to stand when approaching our own faith traditions, to sort of stand against the dehumanization and religious bigotry that those in our faith communities might be leveling towards or directing towards people of other faith traditions. So in a certain way, I think there's intra-religious work that has interreligious implications. So some of my work in the past and up till today has been helping Catholics and other Christians unlearn some of their Islamophobia, in addition to anti-Semitism and other forms of bigotry, because I think we can only sort of build those better relationships with each other if we have learned to let go of some of those stereotypes and tropes and biases that sometimes we don't even realize that we have on surface level. You know, all of us, I think, would like to think that we come from communities or that we are, you know, people who are loving and open and hospitable. But all of us, just sort of by virtue of being human, carry stereotypes and misgivings about people who are different from us. And I also think so much of, or, you know, one of the things I think about a lot is how anytime that we talk about us, anytime we try to define who we are, there's an implicit othering that's occurring. And so we have to be really attentive and kind of critical to how we're doing our own self-definition as religious communities, because anytime that we sort of say, oh, well, we're like, our group is like this, Christians are like this, Christians are great because XYZ, well, we're implying that everyone else is different, and they might not be, at least in that way. And so I think that's some important intra-religious work that we have to do that will have, I hope, positive implications for our relationships with people of other faith traditions. I also just want to kind of go back to this point of holding together dialogue and social justice. And, you know, I do think there are so many areas of collaboration that are going on and that can be deepened. I'll just share one story that I was particularly moved by. Out in San Diego, Bishop Pham, the new bishop in the Catholic Church out there, and other religious leaders, both Jewish and Muslim, have been basically interrupting ICE from detaining and deporting migrants when they come to the courthouse for like hearings and things. And just their physical presence and being there, like their presence of solidarity, has kept numerous people from being separated from their families. And I just find that a very moving sort of interreligious witness. And I know things like that are happening in lots of places, even when we don't hear about it.
Thank you. Rabbi Rose?
I'll add 2 points of passion and 2 points that are increasingly coming into focus for me in the realm of interreligious engagement. One is, I think we need to pay more attention to the interreligious and cross-cultural development of young people before they go off to college, university, or work life. As I think back on the last several years and the protest and counter-protest movements on colleges and universities, and the ways in which students and faculty and administrators have struggled mightily just to sit at the same tables to explore some of what is most painful. I think that we have to think deeply about how we are preparing young people to go out into the world. And I don't think we've done enough of that. So that is one piece of work that I feel passionate about. And the other is that Jews and Muslims need to commit themselves to ongoing interreligious engagement. And we need to understand that we will be challenged significantly with every explosion in the Holy Land, literal and metaphoric. And our presence at the table, as Hakan said earlier, is more important than ever. And the bilateral and the trilateral each require attention in different ways. And I think that North American Jewish and Muslim leaders have a responsibility to convene and to covenant. And that's one project that I'm actively working on, because I also feel like those of us that have been doing this work for some time now, struggling, stumbling, groping, picking ourselves up, owe it to the next generation of leaders, lay and professional, to share what we've learned along the way so that they'll be better equipped. And again, that hasn't happened enough. And oftentimes it's episodic and it's interrupted quite violently by events in Israel and in Palestine. And so I want to spend more time on that work with others that are interested and committed to that piece of this project. Thank you.
Thank you. Hakan, in our last couple of minutes, what would you say? What are the couple of essential things for the future?
Well, I mean, the greater the challenge, the greater our responsibility, I would say. Yes, a lot of things are coming up. I think one thing we are responsible to tell others is that our religious traditions are not the source of those problems. Maybe lack of enough knowledge of those traditions is a great source of a lot of misinformation and conflict. If we can really mobilize our resources, perhaps greater opportunities may come up. Secondly, perhaps in relation to what Rabbi Or was saying, perhaps to our youth, we could teach our youth that our religious traditions are not just cultural, anthropological field of activity or a social construct that is out there now irrelevant. I think our responsibility is to show them that our faith traditions are originating from a divine source, which we could really benefit in times of psychological challenges, in times of violence. When we need a refuge, our traditions are there. When we are seeking meaning about our lives, our traditions are some of the richest resources to bring up some answers to. So our traditions, I believe, are very relevant to our needs. And I think as fellow practitioners of our traditions, we're now more responsible in bringing that up.
Thank you very much. And I want to thank all three of you for being here. Jordan Denari Duffner, Hakan Yesilova, and Rabbi Or Rose. Thanks for giving us some of your time and your insights. And thank you to all of those who have watched and participated with us here in the last hour. This recording will be on the Focolare Media YouTube channel in the next day or two. And when it is, I hope you'll share it with others, because I think we can all agree that we need more people committed to this work, the work of unity. And Nostra Aetate was a great step in the right direction 60 years ago. And we have been honoring that and remembering that today, but also talking about what needs to happen next. So let's focus on what needs to happen next, all right? Thank you for joining us. I'm Jon Sweeney, and this is a Living City Conversation. Goodbye.